And I think that that's the joy of building this community is like when when you're trying to be numb and disinterested all the time, it is also an evasion of vulnerability
Mhm.
and this way of not letting anything affect you. Because if you're vulnerable, you are currently letting those feelings like touch you and affect you and
Mhm.
change the way that you're living your life. And that is very counterproductive when you are numbing yourself out to any kind of deep feelings.
Hello, and welcome to Pieces, the podcast where we'll work on outlining the intersection of our personal and political work.
Here, we want to create a space to talk about how our relationships with ourselves and our communities are inherently political, integrate the knowledge we have received and continue to receive, and speak to and dream of justice, love, and community. I'm Ella, they, he. I work on the intersection of consent, conflict, and community, newly defined as a conflict doula. And this is
Hi, I'm Carson. Any pronouns with a preference for they, them. I'm dedicated to making space to question our systems and trying to build resilience, community care, and solidarity into the everyday.
and this is chapter 2 of our book club, where we are talking about Love in a Fucked Up World by Dean Spade. It is a book about consent, conflict, and community in a way that the two of us should have written it, but we haven't. And so we're doing a book club about it instead.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons that we're going through this book in this way is I gifted this book to Ella because I read it and I was like, oh my God, Ella, this is what we're working on. And so many of the things that we read, we were like, oh wow, like this is so similar to kind of how we're starting to think through things. So this book basically offers us a starting point to continue to deepen our conversations about the topics.
Yeah, so second episode, people already know what to expect. What did you think, Carson? What was this chapter about?
It's called Stuck on Autopilot. Um, this chapter talks a lot about kind of numbness as culturally and systematically induced and maintained. So, like, how does it kind of, how the systems and the culture that we live in create and maintain numbness in us, emotional numbness. And this is something that we talked about quite a bit last episode. So, we'll probably like not go super deep into this theory in this one. But one of the key things is kind of emotions also. So, how our systems stigmatize and like marginalize the negative emotions. So the things that we see as negative, which would be things like grief or sorrow or anger.
Completely. And it also talks about how when we numb ourselves to these bigger issues, then we need to chase highs to make us feel something. And how this kind of cycle of chasing highs and then being numbed out to any kind of pain or suffering in the world leads you to feeling stuck and not able to participate in and shape society around you.
Yeah, and also he identifies like these sex myths as specific spaces in which we're chasing these highs. So we're like engaging in our relationships, our romantic and sexual relationships from a space of kind of chasing this high of like dating or of what he's terming like the romance myth illusions. And his argument is, and something I agree with, is that this sets us quite a far way back instead of bringing us forward.
Yeah. The entire time, he doesn't name it explicitly, but one of the things that always came up for me was just like the big grand gestures of romance movies and novels, which I was very much swept up in high school. Like, I remember I used to constantly like create scavenger hunts or like big public declarations. Like, I was obsessed with flash mobs for a really long time in high school. I was just like, I was a theater kid at heart, and I was like, this is amazing. Like having these really big, grandiose gestures of romance and love that everyone else can see, and it becomes a spectacle and like a performance of it. Like that's what real love is. And the journey of moving from that to having someone who like sees me and sees the like little minute details in my day-to-day life. Before that would have been like, yeah, okay, whatever. Like no one sees that. There aren't any likes on my Instagram post about it. Whereas now, like that has become the way that I feel most loved in this world is like seeing someone who knows the intricate tiny details and can like pick up on that in the day to day. And I think that that is the essence of this chapter as well, of like how can we go from being numbed out from the big feelings to a focus on nuance and subtlety and feeling into like tiny shifts.
Yeah, like being attuned. Like that's what for me, like this idea of like attunement means is like how are we attuned also to ourselves and to the people around us. And yeah, so Spade is like arguing this from like this place of like that numbness and distraction are essential methods of control. And that these are like necessary to perpetuate the systems that we live in and the ways that we kind of see injustice or participate in injustice in our everyday lives, right? And this is something that we touched upon in the last episode, so we won't go that far into it. But one thing that I think I read in this chapter that we didn't talk about so much in the last episode is that it's also like they want us to be numbed from the pain that comes from being targeted and exploited, and to have, I'm quoting, to have a thick skin and not resist. We learn that to get by, we need to feel as little as possible, right? So, also really like recognizing that this numbness is not just like the numbness of other people's exploitation or like the ways in which we're confronted continuously with grief inducing news messaging, so many social media posts about like loss of life or like destruction of the environment or just massive, massive injustices, but that it's also really about like being able to move in towards like this exploitation of yourself, right? And how can I also become like more attuned to when someone is exploiting me or harming me or targeting me, and what do I do with that also?
Yeah, there's this one quote where he's saying, "We are living under conditions of ecological crisis, war, police and border violence, mass shootings, ongoing genocides, housing and food insecurity around the world, and in our immediate communities. It is offensive to be told that grief is a disorder. How could we not be grieving and aggrieved? Yet jobs, doctors, and cultural institutions tell us that grief is inappropriate or taboo."
Yeah, and I think he goes on to give this example, right, of like how there used to be like for depression, like a year long kind of like grief thing. So if you had suffered a big loss in the year leading up to your depression, then it was normal. And that now over like the last, I don't know how many years, but not very many, that window has been shortened to like 2 weeks. So it's like, oh, if you're still feeling like depressy after having a big loss in your life, after 2 weeks, it's pathologized, right? And so also what does this teach us about like our ability to kind of feel our own emotions and also like feel comfortable in exploring them and understanding them. And I think like this is something that for me is really key in kind of dismantling like this system in our minds, is also to look towards the emotional and to what we're feeling as indicators of like how we're existing in reality, right? And what reality is or like what is happening in the world. Because like I think it's really normal to have a lot of grief and a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety about the world that we're living in, but then you go to therapy, and a lot of the times, if you don't have a good therapist, like who is a little bit well versed in kind of systems, they're going to be like, well, here are the ways that you can kind of like medicate yourself or like deal with yourself to stop feeling those things, instead of like actually giving us the space to explore, to understand, and also to see like what are these things telling me about how I want to be in the world, right? And what I want to do and how I want to also like resist these things. Because if you're feeling grief, it's because something is happening that you're not also not agreeing with or like that you have some resistance against.
Yeah, and a point that he makes time and time again is your ability to meet yourself in your emotions is also how deep you can meet others in their emotions. And so, if you are unable to sit with negative emotions and process them and feel them and see where it all comes from, then you're also going to have difficulty and like lack of patience for other people who aren't numbing themselves. So when they are
Mhm.
feeling big feelings and reacting to something, you can have this like feeling of, I mean, I definitely experienced that where I'm like, whatever, like it's not such a big deal. Just, you know, why are you feeling it? Just turn it off and be fine, because then I'll be more comfortable and don't have to watch you having emotions. Hmm.
Yeah, or like then I don't have to actually deal with the emotions that your emotions are bringing up in me, right? Because I think that that's also a big thing. Like if someone is experiencing like great grief and sorrow for the world, like it can be hard to sit with that because it makes you also kind of cognizant of your own feelings about that and like what those feelings possibly mean. And this is like really like for me, this is why I think this whole like emotional awareness process can you like there's only so much that I think like individual therapy can do. Like I mean, yes, it's important to kind of like go and do talk therapy and like kind of dig deep into like, okay, so what does this mean? Where does this come from? Like, how am I moving in it? But like at the end of the day, I think it's so important to have someone who can mirror you and who you can have a conversation with about it and who can maybe show you also different perspectives or even just model an emotion. Like, just be like, hey, I'm having this feeling so that you also have permission to have that feeling, right? So, and yeah, people in this like isolation of like self-help or like I just have to like do this or I have to deal with this and I have to do it on my own, like I have to withdraw and isolate. Like I don't know if I believe in that anymore. I think I used to believe in it a little bit more than I do now, but now I'm really like, no, I don't think that we can actually get anywhere just me by myself completely isolated from other people.
Adding on to that, there's the one section on building awareness of nuance and subtlety, where he says, learning to notice the subtleties we have been taught to ignore could seem unrewarding. Would becoming more aware of other people's feelings and experiences mean that we have to take more responsibility for our impact on them or act towards them with greater care? Would it leave less time to strive for the fantastical rewards as we attend to the actual sensations of our lives? I think that that is such an important point is if you are able to dismiss and invalidate and say that feelings aren't important, then you also don't need to take them seriously. So if you hurt someone or annoy them and you just want them to get over it and not kind of marinate in that feeling, then you can also care a lot less about the way that you're impacting people, the way you're harming people, and just kind of go about in a more nonchalant way. Like I think about the word cool and how it really means like disinterested, not attached, like I'm too cool to care. That there's this whole like mythos around someone who does not feel deeply as being something to strive for. I'm picturing like leather jacket, shades, a ciggy, just being like, I don't go fuck. And everyone's like, that's cool. But what if you can care and love and kind of feel so deeply that you also want to take responsibility for the way that you interact with the world?
Yeah. Yeah, and to take responsibility for the relationships you have. And I think when I talk about relationships, like I'm not just talking about like romantic relationships, definitely not only that, but also not only like the relationships that you have with humans. I think it's also really about like the relationship that you have with the ground that you're standing on, with like the ecosystem that you're embedded in. Like when you care, like I mean, yeah, like if, to take your example a little bit further, right? To like have your cigarette and like flick it into the gutter because you don't care about anything and you also don't care if you leave your cigarette butt on the street, and this is really for me I think something that has to do with showing up in like with a collective responsibility also, right? Like when I'm emotionally attuned and when I'm kind of in touch with like the softer parts of me, like the parts of me that care, the parts of me that are like interested in other people and in their feelings, and I'm not like consistently like spending all of my emotional energy kind of trying to repress and put away all of my feelings. I think that I'm much more capable of like coming into a collective space and being like in a collective mindset. I think an interesting example that I have is I went to like a longer education. And then the first, I think, 3 days, I spent like oh my like in my childhood trauma and not being able to just like process my feelings and just being like, oh my God, why does everyone hate me? Like, do the people even like me? Like, am I doing things wrong? Like, and actually like what that does is, or what that did in that moment was really to like turn me so inwards at myself and be so focused on myself, like as an individual, be so focused on like how I align in this like social constellation, be so focused on like, am I doing it right? That I actually like don't manage to connect well with other people. Because also then when I'm like talking or when I'm interacting, and I think like this is something I've been working on for a while, but like I can still like go into kind of like like a need to prove myself, like a need to be liked, a need for someone else to like kind of like see me. And it's all about me, right? Like my whole kind of mind space is like occupied by me, by myself, by me, the individual, rather than thinking like, okay, how can I actually contribute to this collective, right? So, and this is where I think I see like this idea of individualism come up really, really strongly in a way where it's like it feels like that's just my feeling, that's just my history, that's just like who I am, and oh, I'm just having this feeling and therefore it's like 100% true. And actually, like for me, that's a really good example of like how the system has like naturalized itself in me, like how me, individual Carson, has been naturalized in my head to the point where I'm having like intense emotional reactions to like a perceived kind of threat to, I don't know, my social clout or whatever. And then yeah, basically like the only thing that helps is to just like sit with it, talk to people about it, and be really honest also about like how I'm feeling and be like, hey, like I see that I'm doing this. Like, can you also help me maybe to like, give me feedback when you see that I'm going into this mode or like, and that helps, right? To like kind of try to solve it in a collective way and also to remember like the people around me have responsibility for me also. And I'm not like to not be so wrapped up in myself.
Wow. That was also a moment where I was at a conference recently and I was part of a team, and one of them was just like, I'm in a really bad mood. I have no space or time for all of this like banter and laughter. And they're like, my country's being bombed right now. I'm coming here because I want to get work done and I want to like focus and not sit and wallow, but no banter, no fun. Like, no. And as we were going through, it got to me, we were doing like a check-in, and I remember feeling like slightly dissociated, like I was looking through a very long tunnel, like I didn't feel present in my body. I felt very like off, and I was trying to do a check-in of how I felt, and I just said, I feel really vulnerable and kind of like I have been chastised because I was having fun. So I just need to remind myself that like you are allowed to have laughter and banter, and like now that this was expressed in the space, then that means that I can like take heed of that. That doesn't mean that I was doing something wrong
Mhm.
beforehand. And yeah, I just have this narrative that people hate me and always are mad at me. And so just, if anyone ever wants to tell me that they don't hate me, that would be great. But I hear you. This is all about me. Thanks for like holding space for that. I'm gonna let that go and like let's like move on. And throughout the rest of the weekend, just at random times, anyone who attended that meeting would see me and go, "Hey Ella, don't hate you," and just continue on. And it was so nice of
Mhm.
it was like a throwaway joke at the end of just like, oh, sorry, I just realized I'm dissociating right now because I just assumed that you guys all hate me because I did something quote unquote wrong. But I know that that's not true, coming back to myself. And then they all just affirmed and worked with me on that. And I think that that's the joy of building this community is like when you're trying to be numb and disinterested all the time, it is also an evasion of vulnerability
Mhm.
and this way of not letting anything affect you. Because if you're vulnerable, you are currently letting those feelings like touch you and affect you and
Mhm.
change the way that you're living your life. And that is very counterproductive when you are numbing yourself out to any kind of deep feelings. So it's very
Yeah.
hard to be vulnerable in any way if you literally don't have access to your feelings. And that vulnerability and that letting of people in is that moment of connection. Like you're not only letting the feelings touch you, you're also letting someone else witness you in that and have them touch you. And that's why it's so integral for relationship building.
In the chapter, Spade talks about kind of like why is emotional awareness worth pursuing, and I think like two things really get touched upon by the story, right? Like this idea of like not getting overwhelmed and staying true to our values, right? So this you're in this situation, like you're feeling like quite overwhelmed by your own feelings, but because you're practicing like this emotional awareness, you're able to say like, okay, this is what's happening and I'm actually going to like actively like put that on the table in front of me and like disidentify from it, like, hey, this is happening but this is not how I want to be acting. So like that's something that I think like is really key to like why we want to pursue emotional awareness in our political spaces, because it's like a way for us to actually like come into the space and stay true to like what is it actually that we believe, and that's really important. And I think also like not having to avoid your own feelings and then lie about it, right? So not having to like sit there in the check-in and go, ha ha ha, everything is fine, I feel great. And like you're literally like lying to your comrades, like to your companions, like you're lying to them. And this is like also really hard. Like, how are we gonna ever build trust with each other and like kind of like get to a point where we feel comfortable like really putting big risks? It's like we don't even feel comfortable like not lying to the people who are around us, right? So those are two things that I think are really like key here in terms of like why do we want to pursue this emotional awareness. So he's kind of like outlining like why we want to pursue emotional awareness. One of the like the first thing that he says that I think is 100% like accurate is this thing that Ella already talked about, right? Like this idea that it's easier to be around other people's strong emotions rather than solving or minimizing their feelings. And I think, yeah, I mean, in our political spaces, this is important because also we get angry and we get upset and bad things happen. And if there's no space for that, how are we going to kind of deal with it, right?
Yeah, I think strong emotions are the goal, and so trying to minimize them when other people experience them. And also that solving is it's a natural instinct. Someone's like, "Oh, there's a problem. You're crying, therefore there's a problem, and therefore I can go solve something." And I think that we talked about this a lot in our episode about whiteness as well, of like how centered white people are and think that the solution is for them to do something, and how often like that is being productive and overproduction and overdoing things and like going over borders when so often the answer is to stop and not do anything and just be there and witness. Like there's a quote that John Green talks about a lot from his early days when he was trying to become a priest or something like that, where he said, "Don't just say something, stand there." And I love that. Like stop just trying to fix things by just pause, let things unravel in the time that they need, and let emotions usually only take like 90 seconds to express. So if you don't interrupt it and you don't try to like stop the process and keep it in your body but just let it flow, it's like 90 seconds, you can handle it.
Yeah, and also just like this gives you an opportunity also to know like, what's happening in me right now? How do I feel when I see this? And like why, right? It's also like an opportunity for us to know ourselves better and to know each other better because like when you can sit and hold space for someone's emotions, like that's a beautiful thing. That's also a trust building thing. That's like this person is also giving you a gift, right? Of like sharing themselves with you in a vulnerable way. Like I think that's a really beautiful thing. And this is for me also really like a part of kind of communal relating. And I do think like this is linked also to the third point that he makes in this list, which is not getting dragged up in someone else's emotions. So it's also like sometimes someone is having a big feeling and like you can kind of have the tendency to just like go with that person. And I do think like that's where practicing kind of emotional awareness and this idea of like discernment, like being able to kind of see like, okay, what is happening here? Like, is this person maybe hurting because it's touching upon a old wound or a systemic wound, and is that why this feeling is really really big, or like what is like the appropriate response here? And like, and I think that's where like discernment comes in, and not getting dragged up in someone else's emotions is a result of that discernment. And that discernment can only come from kind of being able to check in with yourself and be like, okay, where am I? Actually, I've been thinking about this in terms of venting. I have a ban on venting for myself now because I go and I get really, really upset about something. And I'm like basically just like word vomiting like my anger. And I actually need someone to like put a pause on that, right? And say, like, okay, yes, I see that you're having a feeling. Like, you can have the feeling. You don't need to do this whole like trying to get like getting caught up in your own emotion. And sometimes when I'll do this, I notice that like the other person or the other people that I'm with are kind of like going with me in that feeling. And that's actually like not so helpful. And I think it's important also that we kind of like start to think about like, okay, there's like a feeling, but then sometimes we're also inducing the feeling in ourselves and in others. And I think when we rant, when we vent, and it can be helpful. Like I don't know, maybe for other people it's helpful. For me, I've noticed that it's not so helpful because it gets me stuck. And then it's like if I tell a story and then the other person tells a story and then and we're just like going up on the activation ladder and like getting more and more upset, and actually like we're also not able really to hold space for each other. We can't downregulate. Like this for me is not a helpful state to be in for me.
Oh, yes. I've been part of this like really big drama from years ago. Actually, the reason why I came up with Intimacy of Harm, the workshop, and all this stuff, it's like this drama has given me so many tools and ideas and ripe with opportunity to think through conflict and people's conflict styles. But it happened like 4 years ago now, and it's still drama in my community. And I'm so over it. I just like, I really want to lay this to rest and just be like, can we just move on? Because it's taken over our lives for too long. And I've had that feeling and I was very like content to move on. And then a new friend who's in my life was like, wait, what drama? I missed this. And I was like, you don't know the story. And I was like, let me tell it to you. And I sat down and I talked to her for maybe like 3 hours. And like Rohan kept adding more details and being like, yeah, I forgot about that. And I started like retelling the story and just getting so angry and hyped up and back to the point where I was like, let's rip him to shreds. And I was like, I'm back in here. Like I haven't let it go at all.
Yeah.
Um, so finding ways to really express the feeling, sit with it, but not give words to it and not try to turn it into a story and an identity that you can like relate to helps so much of like, I feel a
Yeah.
lot of pain here. How can we let this go?
Yeah. So another point that he makes in the book is that like our own emotional awareness is like important for not getting defensive or going into a shame spiral when someone else has strong emotions about us. Now, I think that this is a point that we have talked about more than enough in, was it the last episode? It's one of the episodes. Like we have talked about this, I think, in basically every single episode about like how when you are not in touch with yourself, it's really, really hard to be accountable. I have 6 million examples of myself, like probably the most recent being this morning, where I was just like caught up in my own shit and therefore not able to really come out and be accountable or like even, when you're feeling like really like upset and then someone does something and then you're like, and then attack them and then later you're like, I'm not even gonna say sorry because I was so upset. Yeah, like I think we all do this all the time, and I think actually like kind of those spaces are for me kind of the most difficult place to actually really practice doing it differently. Like if it's like a big thing, I think I'm a lot better at being like, hey, I'm sorry. But I'm like, if I was like catty to you this morning because I was tired and I needed to eat something, I'm like, and I have to really get out of my own emotional state before I'm like properly accountable.
There are these two like retired therapists who started making reels and they're amazing. And a recent one on apologies and accountability was like a good apology starts when your desire to own what you did is bigger than your desire to explain why you did it.
Yeah,
And I think that that is also such a big part of like, it's not about you. You can leave the
I
ego
love
at the
that.
door. It's
Yeah,
about owning what you did and caring about that more
yeah,
than explaining it. And I think this is a big
yeah,
part of like being stuck on autopilot. The chapter of this, the title of this chapter is the opposite of that is just like doing things on purpose. And like when I say that this is a book that we should have written, it means on purpose is one of my catchphrases. That is literally how I try to move through this world is by saying, okay, but am I doing this on purpose because I want to? I was recently at a festival where I had such a big grudge, and I was walking around and I was like, I am mad at these two people, so I'm going to be stinky about it and angry and like let my like stinkiness show. And when other people interact with them, I'm going to be like a little bit mad at them as well. And just kind of, I was like, and then I did
beautiful.
this one. Thank you. I'm
Immature
so
response.
thank you. But I also was very grounded and okay with that response. I was like, it's true. These people piss me off and I am mad at them. So I don't mind that I'm in this moment. Uh, and then I went and we had to call in our parents. And when I called in my dad's energy, I was like, oh my God, he is so proud of the fact that he is an Irish American man who holds on to a grudge like no other. And he is like so proud of his grudges. And I think they're so stupid. And 10 seconds ago, I was having a great time with my little grudge, but now I realize that that's something that my dad does. And now all of a sudden the choice has come to me of like, do this because it feels good, or change the behavior because you want it to align with your morals and your values. And I thought it was so interesting where I was so fine with it when I thought that there wasn't a choice and this was just the way to do it.
Mhm.
And as soon as there was a moment where it was like channeling my dad's like energy, realizing that this was him, this was 100% him playing out in my body and being like, fuck,
Yeah.
now I have to make a
Yeah.
choice. And as soon as I claim it and I say that I'm doing this on purpose, I don't want to do it anymore because it's not indicative of how I feel or how I want to act.
Yeah, because like it's like, hey, this is actually not how I want to show up in the world, right? And I think like that's really for me been one of the most I think kind of like simple but crazy things about developing more emotional awareness. It's like when you get feedback and someone is like, "Hey, you were doing this thing." And I think like there's a part of me that's always just like, "Yeah, but that's just how I am." And then it's like, okay, well, someone saw it like this. And is that really like, is that completely untrue? Like, is it completely untrue that I'm like that? And then it's like, fine, okay, maybe not. And then it's like, all right, and is that how I want to be in this world? And it's like, yeah, not really. And I might have had a million good reasons for doing it, right? But at the end of the day, like, I think for me, it's really about who do I want to be and who am I being, right? Who are other people like telling me that I'm being? Again, like, I think we say this quite often, like, this is not stuff that you have to practice with like every Dick, Bob, and Harry that like comes your way. Is that a thing? I don't know. I feel like that's something my grandfather would say that comes your way and it's just like I'm gonna tell you who you are, like no, of
You
course
don't
not.
have
That's
to do
again
this
like
with every hairy dick that comes your way.
all right, so after this deep dive we have literally gotten like maybe halfway through the chapter, and that is okay because we don't need to talk about the whole chapter, we just need to talk about things that are jumping out for us. So that is what we have been doing. But there's a lot
Exactly.
more in this chapter.
That's because feelings are big and complex and messy, and we try to make them seem like these like rigid, structured things that we can like go through really quickly, but they're not. And so that's also what this podcast episode is like. And I would like to say that I feel a little bit, not like an expert, but I have a very interesting point of view on feelings, purely as someone who has gone on hormone replacement therapy and has experienced a dramatic change in how I feel feelings in a very gendered way. And I think that that's something that's fascinating. First of all, just because it's interesting to like see the different genders physically in my body, but also about how it relates to like power and emotions. Who gets to feel feeling, and how is that a gendered experience? How is that a racial experience? And how does like power and emotions come up in spaces? And how does that relate to like who gets to do the work? Who is seen as like cool for being emotional? You know, if you have like a there's that like mom friend who's always there for you to talk to and who can help you through emotional journeys, and you're like, wow, that friend's amazing. And then there's like the cool dude who doesn't feel anything and is very distant and also gets social props for that. But if he were to start being very emotional, he would get a very different cultural response than and be like, well, what are you doing? Same as if she were to like suddenly be very cold and distant, you'd be like, you're supposed to be taking care of my emotional needs. So I think it's really important to also highlight power within emotional spaces.
Yeah, and like who gets to be sensitive, what kind of sensitivity and vulnerability is accepted and like seen as like okay. Like I mean we know that like for example white femininity has like a very specific kind of way of being like I'm putting in between air quotations vulnerable, which I would argue is actually more of like a weaponization of this vulnerability and like a creation and like a recentering of the self in the space, right? Like this idea of like the white tears, right? So there is also like what patterns have been ingrained in us in terms of like what kind of vulnerability, what kind of sensitivity is like politically, socially, culturally acceptable. Like there's specific like dynamics, like social cultural dynamics, political institutions, like hierarchies that like look at people in different ways and look at their vulnerability in different ways. And these are also things that I think are really important for us to consider when we're talking about this, right? Like I think as a white person who is obviously like perceived in the world at large as a woman. Like I think I am able to like navigate certain spaces of vulnerability in a really, really different way than my friends of color would be able to do, right? And I think like that is something that we have to be aware of and also mediate for in our political spaces.
Completely. And I think with that in mind, since we won't be able to get into everything this chapter talks about, and what we really appreciate about this book is the list of questions and kind of the work that you can do as you're reading it. Um, I think we're just going to keep the energy alive while we answer this short set of questions about our own emotions. So, Carson, what feelings come most easily to you as a white woman? Just kidding.
Oh, victimization. Um, I'm like on the spectrum of intense emotionality, and this has been something that has been like really something that I also have to work on because I can go really, really, really high into my feeling really, really quickly. So I can get really, really, really sad or really, really, really shameful or like very, very, very joyful quite easily. And I think that actually like, the feelings that come like most easily are those big feelings. Whereas kind of like eking out like these little specifics of like what am I actually feeling and like what does that actually tell me about like the situation that I'm in is like a little bit more tricky for me. And so it's kind of like looking at the like nitty gritty emotions, basically like, okay, I'm angry, but like what kind of anger? And also just like to yeah to find the nuance in those feelings, like that has been like my process. So the big feelings are relatively easy, even though I think I do still find it like tricky. Like I think I'm very easy to go into like happiness and joy and like oh like everything is great, and I find it more difficult to like allow myself to like really go into kind of being sad or being angry because like I think I still also have some stigma on it or like this feeling that like if I go into it that I'm never going to get out of it or like that I'm just going to get really depressed, and actually like I think not doing that makes me depressed, but that's a story for another day. What about you?
Um, it's a great question. If only I'd thought about this before the podcast. Well, Rohan calls me the grumpert. I'm really good at being annoyed and grumpy and kind of like, meh, like just kind of like letting that out. But I would also say that that is work I've been doing for the last 5 years because the first assignment that my therapist gave me was to annoy the people closest to me who love me the most so that I can see that I can annoy them and they like wouldn't leave me. And that led to me coming home and like just annoying the shit out of Rohan. And it did wonders because first of all, he didn't leave me. But second of all, like we used to have conversations where I'd be like, "Hey, are you mad at me?" And he'd be like, "No, like not even a little bit. I'm just existing and having a great time. Why?" And I'd be like really dissatisfied with that answer and be like just like poking and pressing until finally he was like, "Are you mad at me?" And I'd be like, "Oh, never. Why would you even suggest such a thing? I'm not allowed to be mad at you." And it would like freak me out. Um, and so learning to like be annoyed and be impatient and to like express that instead of swallowing it and pretending like I wasn't has been amazing for our relationship. But I'd say it's been like hard, concerted effort over the last 5 years where that, to the fact that that was the first thing that came to mind where I was like, oh, I'm really good at being annoyed. I was like, wow, congratulations. I like
Yay, good
worked
for
so hard on
Ella.
that. I'm very goofy, laughy, joyful. Like those are all fine. I'm someone who like cackles in public. Like I can have like really deep, loud laughter, and I have no shame in expressing that. That's something where people around me would be like, "Oh, calm down. Like we're in public. Maybe don't like scream your laughter out loud." And I'd be like, "No, I'm having a really good time." And I don't care if people notice that. But crying in front of people, being seen as like stupid, that really shuts me down. Like feeling seen as stupid or me being angry at other people or feeling any kind of anger, like I don't express that at all. It only comes out as sadness or like empathy for the other person. Like it doesn't come out as anger and like standing up for myself. I don't have that one. You and the second question, which are taboo or inaccessible?
I find anger a really interesting one because like I feel that I really like bounce between these kind of two poles of like not being allowed to be angry and like being in my righteous anger. So it's just like on the one hand I kind of have like this like almost like this like mothering vibe of like I have to like talk you through your feelings and like be really calm and regulated and like solve your problems for you. Obviously unhelpful in one way. And on the other hand I have like my righteous anger of like no, actually, you did something that pissed me off, and I am completely righteous in like making you suffer for it. This for me really reflects like a something that I also see coming back in the book, right? Like this idea that we're either like kind of like wanting to minimize the issue or wanting to maximize the issue. And this is something that we've talked about. We talked about in the last podcast also about chapter one, like that we don't find like the right in between for these feelings because I think the in between is kind of where I would rather be, and that's like not always accessible for me.
That's something that Rohan has been working on with me is when I have a reaction to something, he goes, okay, can we put this on a scale? Is this like a big emergency or is this like a small inconvenience? And like, can we just work on having like an appropriate size reaction to the problem? But also because we've been watching like a lot of parenting videos on Instagram and he's been gentle parenting me and
Is
it's
gentle parenting
infuriating,
you?
but it's very
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, and I think like, you know, these things are also mediated by like the political spaces that we're in, like those socio-political institutions that we live in, because it's like, yeah, sometimes something is like a minor inconvenience, but it really, really hurts because it's something that's happened to you so many times. Like, for example, being like perceived as a woman, people thinking that you're less intelligent or less capable. Let's say like, you know, like the first, second, third, fourth, fifth time this happens, like maybe not a big deal, but then if like your partner says something to you or your friend says something to you that kind of like indicates that and rubs against that wound, then it really, really hurts and you get really, really angry about it and you feel righteous in your anger because like there are all of these other moments that this same thing has happened to me and it's like so unfair and I'm so upset about it and like this is something I see myself do a lot. But then it's also just like now I'm making this other person presumably someone who loves and cares about me and or is like organizing with me and has a shared goal and like we want the same things in life and like I want to trust this person responsible also for like all of these other things that have happened to me. And I think like that's not from my side, like that's thinking about it like that helps me kind of get out of the righteous anger of like okay, it was a minor inconvenience. Yes, I'm righteous in feeling upset that this is happening in the sense of like, yeah, politically, like it's not fair. But like, is this person actually like the representation of the system that I'm trying to fight against? Or can I just be like, hey, that hurt my feelings. I feel like it's influenced by this and this and this power system. Can we maybe not do that anymore? Right? Well, that feels like an appropriate thing for me to do then.
Uh, This is the next question. It's just really interesting. It says, are there feelings you hear other people talk about that you have never felt? I think this is really interesting because I don't know, maybe not like the feelings themselves, but like the how to feel. I find that when I am on testosterone, I can experience one emotion kind of at a time, where I'll have one emotion and then it ends, and then the next one will start, and then it ends. And they're all kind of like very manageable, like bite-sized experiences that kind of flow into my daily life. And like I felt like I really mellowed out and was like quite stable day to day. Whereas before testosterone, when I was on estrogen, I felt a lot of emotions kind of simultaneously in like a big soup that I would kind of be bathing in. So it wasn't like a, ooh, here's a little emotion. It was like I am literally in the soup. It is above my head. And I'm so overwhelmed by the experience that I don't even have words. Like there'd be often times where I'd be sobbing, crying, and laughing at the same time. And Rohan would be like, are you sad? And I'd be like,
Good.
yeah. And he was like, are you happy? And I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that that's just really interesting because it's really hard to put that into words. Like when you're talking about emotions, like when people have such a different baseline understanding of what can even happen and like physiologically, it's really difficult to see eye to eye on what that kind of response is like. So I think I don't know if there's necessarily an emotion that I haven't felt, but I think it's a really interesting thing to keep in mind of when you're looking at this kind of stuff of like, whoa, people have very different bodily sensations when feeling these emotions.
Yeah, it's funny because I really recognize that, but I only have it like the days before I get my period.
Oh yeah, very heavily period affected with
Yeah.
that.
I don't know, like, are there feelings I hear other people talk about that I haven't felt? I mean, so like there's like feelings that I think that I hear from other people that I think I've not necessarily had the experiences necessary to feel that. So I think yes, 100%, because I also think like certain things, like our feelings are also linked to like our material reality, right? And like I don't know what it's like to come out of a war zone. Like I don't know that. Like I don't know what despair would lead you to leave behind everything that you know and love to come live in like a country that is like culturally completely different where you don't speak the language. I don't know that. I don't understand it either in the sense of like I can empathize with it and in so far as I can connect it to my own experience of like hopelessness when thinking about the climate crisis or when thinking about, you know, but like I think it's also fine for me to recognize like that those experiences are just not something that I have access to and therefore I the only thing that I can do is like have compassion and like try to have empathy and like be like, hey, like I'm here to listen to it. But yeah, like I mean, there are just certain things that I haven't experienced. And I think like that's a real thing. And maybe we use the same words to describe similar feelings, but it is just different. And I think like there are a lot, we all just have different experiences and we have also different feelings. And like that's also okay, right? We can try to find connection like where we can.
I think one serious answer of a feeling that I've never felt is kind of like a connection to a country or a place. Um, and it shows up in so many different like layers of it. There's like, oh, I'm watching Eurovision or the World Cup or something, and I kind of want to have a country to root for, but I just don't feel like a connection to a country in that way. And seeing people like really diehard fans like going out to a football match and being like, that's my team, is something that I've like experienced in some ways, but I don't have that connection to place. And I think you
Mm-hmm,
talking about people leaving a war zone, also that feeling of like, this is my country that I want to fight for. This is my
mm-hmm,
homeland. Like, this is the place where I feel connected to it and I want to stay here. That's something that I also really want to experience. And I have my community or my group of friends or different ways where I'm like, this is where I feel belonging, but it's not rooted in place and it makes me feel very like floaty and unattached in a way that like I just came back from 3 months of visiting Nepal where my partner could go, this is the town that my great grandfather like founded. And here's my cousin who can show me this lineage and this temple that he built, with the groundskeeper like recognizing me and my connection to this place and like having experiences of groundedness and connection that I literally just came back from Ireland and I was like, cool, it's where my ancestors came from. But I don't feel that calling of like this is mine or I have any kind of claim or ownership over the indigenous practices here or like that feeling of placement. Like I'm sure that's something I could work on and get to potentially, but I don't feel it. And I had that today with watching someone come home and his entire community met him at the airport and did the haka as he like arrived and they were like so excited that he was coming home and they all were like getting teared up. Just I cried so hard at this video. The haka always gets me. Um, but the fact that an entire community of people showed up to welcome someone home and meet him at the airport brought up so many feelings of being like lost from a sense of like connected community and that like practice of showing up together and saying, hey, we claim you and we missed you and we're going to use this like very
mm-hmm.
symbolic and culturally rich ritual to like bring you back into this sense of like you're part of this. Oh, it got me watching the video and it got me now talking about it.
Yeah, dude, for real. I really recognize it. I think one of the worst parts about it for me is like I feel some sort of like envy towards people who do have that. Like I'm like envious of it because I love that you said like that a group claims you. It's about being claimed. It's like when the land claims you, when the people claim you, like how does that feel? How must that feel to like have that collective? And I think like that is something that I think like a big part of the political work is trying to find ways to start claiming each other and to really like hold on to each other, right? And make each other feel like we're a part of something and we're also a part of something bigger than just like our small tight-knit community. We're a part of like a bigger project, of a bigger revolution, of a bigger like that we belong somewhere. Like the belonging to land also. I think sometimes I feel like I catch a glimpse of it like when I'm in a territory where like sometimes the land just like says something to you, you know? It's just like, and then you like cry because you're like just looking at it and it's just like bringing up something. But yeah, like that rootedness, that feeling of like, this is my home, can't relate. And it's like really rough. I think it's really sad. It makes me feel really, really sad. Like, I really can grieve that part. Yeah.
I think it's why there's so many like conversations about cultural appropriation is because like a lot of us white people just feel so disconnected from any kind of cultural tradition that when we see one, like whenever I see the haka and I have such a huge emotional reaction to it, it's like it would mean the world to me if I had that. And I think that that loss is so present that when we see other cultures doing it, we want to like latch on and be like, me too, please take me in. Of
Yeah. But the thing is, like, we can't claim it, right? Because that's the whole
course not.
point. Like, you have to be claimed. Like, you don't get to claim, like, indigenous identity or claim, like, no, like, they have to claim you. Like, you don't get to decide, you know? And I think this is a really relevant conversation. We talked about it a little bit in, like, our first episode on white supremacy culture, talking about also, like, how whiteness has acted to take that away from us, right? To take, like, any of, like, that kind of community and like how whiteness and capitalism are therefore also like inextricable because without that feeling of groundedness, without that feeling of connection, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna buy stuff to feel better. I'm gonna take drugs to feel better. I'm gonna like, oh well, maybe if I just get skinny enough, or I have a perfect boyfriend, or like I like get married in a massive ceremony, or like then I'll be satisfied for forever. And then yeah, obviously that's not true.
It's not true. I was thinking about this. I went to a festival recently where a friend of mine from college recently moved to Berlin and he was looking for friends and I was like, "Why don't you come?" And and then when I went, we had to bring our own mugs. And so I brought a mug that had a picture of the two of us from like 2016 and it was like a birthday present that he gave me. And the entire festival, I walked around with this mug in my hand and I was like, "Do you see us? Do you see little baby us and how we've been friends for like 11 years?" And like was really showing that off. And on the last day, he was like, "Thank you so much for bringing that mug and being so proud to be my friend and like claiming me in public as like that's my friend." Like that meant so much. And I was like, "Yeah,
Mhm.
we don't really it's cringe to openly claim people because we want to give them their autonomy and individualism and all of those things. But like claiming people feels nice. Being like, yeah, there's a bond here. And I want to affirm that. And I want to feel connected. So, um, this was chapter 2 of Love in a Fucked Up World by Dean Spade. So,
It was kind of, it was
um,
a vague interpretation. Like there was so much of this chapter stuff. Again, like I just recommend getting the book. This was the stuff that made us think a lot. So if you're interested in other things around, he talks a lot about romantic relationships, about crushes, sex, love, and dating, and how that's like, those are also ways to kind of act like there's nothing going on or like numbing out. Um,
Carson and I are also recording these every single day
yes.
without having listened to the previous episode necessarily. So we're figuring it out as we go along. And you
Yay!
might notice kind of more or less prep work and how that affects our conversations, and we're still figuring it out ourselves.
I
Um,
think this entire podcast is like high key us figuring it out ourselves because
Give
we've
us
never
like
made a
3 years.
podcast before.
In like
Yeah, it
three
will take
years,
a
we'll figure out
long
like proper
time.
podcasting. Thank you for listening to chapter 2. Please come to Patreon and engage with our discussion posts, because we have this post where we always say, hey, thoughts and feelings. And we have one very dedicated person who will comment on all of those and share his thoughts and feelings. And you're heartily invited to come and share your thoughts and feelings and
Yes,
practice with a community of people
it's free.
together.
You don't even have to buy a subscription. If you would like to support our work and help us do this at a higher level without needing to have a bunch of other side stuff going on that distracts us from making the podcast, you feel free to support us. But the Patreon is free and accessible to everyone, and we would love to hear thoughts and opinions.
Um, Carson, is there anything you are doing besides this podcast that people might want to know about?
Besides this podcast, I am starting a relationship coaching practice, I guess. Basically coming at relationships from a kind of queer relational perspective, trying to think a little bit more about how systems influence our relationships, how power influences our relationships, a lot of the stuff that we talk about on this podcast, and what are the concrete tools that we can use to make our relationships more revolutionary, more loving, more free. What does freedom mean, etc., etc. So you can find me at the email, which will be in the show notes. What are you doing, Ella?
Mid-September, I'm launching Intimacy of Harm, the practice sessions, where I'll be working with duos, friends, lovers, comrades, family members, to kind of practice that, putting your values into practice in your day-to-day life and having an accountability buddy there, but also mainly working on your conflict skills, your feedback skills, just like how to, yeah, build a revolutionary life together and really put it into that day-to-day practice with having someone there to do it with you. 12-week program. We'll be meeting once a week. You will be working just with your duo, but I might do some group calls with other people in the program just for funsies. We'll see. You can find that at ellashields.com. That's my name.
We hope you found some moments of learning and reflection, and we hope you tune in for our next conversation, which will be about chapter 3.
Chapter
Yay!
3.
Woo.
I think
Excellent.
chapter 3 is about being in love, falling in love.
Where we will talk more about falling in love. One of my favorite things to talk about.
I love falling in love.
Yeah, it's
Um,
beautiful.
Mwah.
Mwah.
Thanks and goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye.